But get your attention, please. We're getting ready to start the second panel this evening, last panel of the day. And again, I'm Dave Mildrew with BioClest. Glad to be here to introduce the panel on robotics, where we are today and where are we headed. And to introduce the panel and moderate the session, David Uffer, Senior Partner from Alira Health. Dave.
Thank you so much. My name is Dave Uffer. I'm Vice President of the MedTech practice at Alira Health. I also lead our Robotics and Advanced Surgical Technologies practice. I'd like to introduce each of the panelists down here, but I'd like them to make their own introductions since I would be repetitive. We'll start all the way at the end with Tal and come back this way.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. My name is Tal Wenderow. I'm a co-founder of Corindus Vascular Robotics. Actually wear some multiple hats, also on the board of directors of Microbot Medical, which is another robotic company, and currently running a digital health startups. Thanks, Dave, for having us, and I'm excited.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Dr. Anand Patel. I'm an interventional radiologist at Providence Hospital. I'm in the Los Angeles area as well as at UC San Francisco. I had a medical device company of my own a few years ago, and since then I've worked with a number of different companies in the med tech world.
Thanks, Dave. Mike Pereira, Chief Strategy and Technology Officer at Ximedica. We're a product development and commercialization company that we work for a variety of different companies that are in the robotics area, and 3 or 4 of them, and yeah. So.
Hey everybody, I'm Adam Sachs. I'm the founding CEO of Vicarious Surgical. We're a surgical robotics company working on a single incision robot with the capability of multi-port surgery.
And Adam, thank you so much for pinch hitting as well. We had Gwen Watanabe, who is the general manager at Smith & Nephew of their U.S. robotics practice, and was ill and unable to attend, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I want to start off with Mike. We're hearing so much discussion about robotics, not only at this conference, in the market. Every end of the globe I travel, we're seeing robotic systems. They're in development across many different areas. Mike, start us off, since you consult with so many of the companies, and you're at the forefront actually of development in this field. Why don't you start us off at least with what you're seeing in the range of the systems out there in terms of capability and functionality?
So I think we need a 2-hour dissertation in order to get through all of those things. But the good news is there's a lot of activity going on. I know different folks are taking different strategies in order to evolve the robotic systems. There are the general education, bigger platform plays that are going on, and Vicarious is one where they have the capability of becoming a large platform, and they be starting probably with an initial indication. There are the specific platform folks like the Strikers of the world that are focusing on specific mobile in and out of the surgical suite, technologies that are fit into the workflow of surgeons. They have, they're not going up against the Intuitive of the world, where they're the big gorilla, and they've found their own way to address a market desire. I wouldn't say it's quite a need yet. It's definitely, there's a lot of desire for robotics, and then the biggest thing that we're starting to see more and more is a lot of the enabling companies. There's a lot of companies that are working where we're starting to see them address issues that are not quite being addressed by these platform companies or specific platform companies that are appearing. So what it's done is created a huge ecosystem of hundreds of different technologies that are really coming together, and I think it's going to pave a way for the next generation of products that are procedure specific and then end up building a robotic system or robotic methodology from the procedure. And all of these enabling technologies were the foundation for getting us there.
Understood. In our robotics practice, we've landscaped over 150 different companies in development of robotics. It's proliferated across every end of surgery and medicine, from, of course, laparoscopy, but neurosurgery, endovascular, endoluminal, ENT, ophthalmology, we've seen it. Tal, why is it so proliferative? Why are these robotic systems across every end of medicine?
Beside the fact that it's cool and everyone wants to go there, I think when you think about the traditional, and I'm not a physician, maybe Anand can help more, most procedures till the last 5 years or even till today was more tailored to the physician. Same practice, physicians doing the same over and over. And when you want to be specific to the patient and started to optimize the procedure for the patient, you need a platform for doing that. And to me, robotics is that platform. And as Mike mentioned, you have all these enabling robotic ecosystem, which I like that, to do that predictive analytics, to do that post-procedure, to do that follow-up, but without standardization and without taking that to the extent of what the physician can do. Similar to the car industry, the aviation industry, right? The pilot is only good to land on the Hudson, right? You don't need the pilot to fly a plane, but you got to the point that they're specialized in how do you guide, how do you make the right decision, but you need a platform. So, but I think, meaning I heard Adam earlier today, what is 3% the penetration rate of robotics? So these are the first generation, and now we'll see more and more focus, low cost, smaller device that you can build a procedure around that, not just the structural.
So when we look at the clinical or procedural need, where does it lie, Anand, as a clinician? I mean, is this being able to achieve different clinical outcomes, or are you looking at being able to do procedures?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and something where obviously we're still trying to figure that out. So, as you could see by, lack of complete broader adoption. But I think in general, what's going to help the physicians is number one, which I think, some of the current systems do, is being able the physician to do things that it's very difficult for them to do. So obtain access in very difficult small places, deep in the pelvis, or places where you can't see very well, right, because you can't get your scope there or your imaging device there, what have you. So I think that's the first thing, is being able to, again, with any technology, doing something that not just the same thing that a human can do, but something better. Going along with that should be ultimately tied to outcomes, right? You're going to have better clinical outcomes by doing these procedures safer, more effective. There should be less complications as a result. But, and that can be a number of things too, like in our world in interventional radiology, less radiation exposure to the patient, but to the staff involved. So I think that, these are kind of some of the things to tackle.
Yeah, I also, if it's okay for me to pile on here, I think to echo what you guys said a little bit, I think we've also all created some of this clinical need, because over the last 20, 30 years, there's been so much advance in healthcare technology, but it's really forced the surgeons to, or the clinicians to learn how to use it, learn how to adapt, learn how to remember all of the options that are just exponentially expanding right now, which is incredible. But I think it's time to to go back to like the car analogy. It's time to actually add some intelligence, add some simplicity to it, to actually make the clinicians' jobs easier so that they can deliver better care. So I think it's one of these sort of interesting paradoxes of, or maybe that's the wrong word, but things about robotics where sometimes it's not even about the direct clinical application. It's about enabling the clinician to do whatever the best clinical option was, where they might have not known how to, or it might have not been an available technique otherwise.
So how about expanding beyond just the actual procedure, but the clinician? Does this afford other clinicians that might not have been able to perform those same procedures with a robotic approach?
I definitely think so in the right circumstance. I mean, I agree exactly with what you were saying as well, in the sense that like a lot of the other things that we see with the boom in artificial intelligence, right, and some of these other technologies out there, where you're actually the technology is giving you information in terms of what decisions to make. That so far, in some sense, has been lacking in the robotics. And I think that tying that in will not only lead to better outcomes, but David, as you say, allow physicians to kind of all do these procedures, or have the qualified person, have people get up to speed and train quicker. And again, I think that's kind of the level 2.0, hopefully, is that having decision making. I mean, I would love to see one day in the interventional suite, where we all know how to get catheters into basic vessels, take angiograms, but then having the robot or the system actually guide you and say, hey, you should consider advancing your catheter to this point to treat the tumor from there, because that would lead to a better outcome, and also the robot could potentially help do that. And I think that if you get to a level of sophistication in that sense, I mean, I think I agree that you may not necessarily need to have an highly specialized interventional radiologist do one type of procedure. It could be any radiologist or any other trained physician. So I think that's definitely possible.
Anything else to add, Adam? I saw, or Mike, I saw you both shaking your heads. Yes.
I'll jump in real quick. I mean, I totally agree. I think, frankly, one of our competitors and pioneers of the industry, Intuitive, is a great example of this with gynecology, especially, of hugely expanding, benign hysterectomy being done with minimally invasive technique by making it significantly easier for the clinicians. Especially taking a population of clinicians that has relatively low MIS caseloads overall, and allowing them to get comfortable doing difficult techniques, especially ones that require, suturing of the vaginal cuff, which is fairly difficult to do with straight sticks, and without having the practice, that it can be impossible for a lot of people. So it's a very long way of saying I totally agree.
So maybe I'll agree and disagree at the same time. A lot of the robotic systems have been improving and incrementally getting to do surgeries that are more minimally invasive in some areas, but for the most part, it's still an improvement on a laparoscopic procedure, right? So we've taken something, and mostly because you need a predicate, right? And the predicate that worked was the laparoscopic procedure. So we've incrementally moved from that procedure to a robotic procedure, and it's not completely clear that the costs actually agree with the benefits that are coming, but that's okay, because the desire for the robotics is helping move the industry and enabling the technologies that we were talking about before, and it's going to lead to procedures being completely redefined. So now now that the technologies are basically coming to fruition, now physicians and companies like that are developing these new technologies are rethinking the procedure itself. So if we're going to be thinking endoluminal, you're going to say, well, robotic systems could do this. These enabling technologies could do this. So let's just not look at what we did before, but just reinvent the whole procedure from the ground up. That's when I think we're going to get the greatest value going forward.
Well, let's just talk about the hard costs. Anand, value analysis committees and department administrators are not Santa Claus. You don't get everything you ask for, even though you're bringing in the revenue, you're treating the patients. There is cost considerations that you really don't get all the say. Is this worth the battle when it comes to defining cost? Are they looked at as, look, this is going to be much more costly procedure, or we can't afford these systems only in specialized cases?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. And I mean, from what I've seen is, you have every year your hospital system has a budget and has a priority for whatever it may be, cardiovascular, oncology, ortho, general surgery, et cetera. And I know our hospital and most hospitals have invested in at least one of these. Like ours specifically, we have the Da Vinci, we have the Mako, but when we talk about that, well, there's a special robot for colectomy and a different robot for hysterectomy, and I mean, at some point, the hospital's not going to buy 20 robots to do one type of procedure. So they're going to try to get the most bang for their buck, and most of that's going to come from what are their overall priorities. Are they trying to build up more cancer or OB-GYN practice or ortho? And ortho's been very successful in that, and there's an economic model behind it. And so they may buy one or two or three of these, and I think that's going to be a limitation if the robots are not versatile enough. And the other thing I've seen, we're starting to hear is, on the interventional side, is that there's some early robotics, like for doing biopsies or certain things where, let's say you could pull a patient out of a really expensive 3 Tesla magnet where they're getting a breast biopsy or a prostate biopsy done, and pull them into a point of care MRI imaging device, and there's a robotic biopsy that can be done in an office. I mean, that's something that they'd change. Like, okay, we're opening up our magnet, keeping that volume and revenue, but we're still growing, doing these great procedures without having to reinvest in another really expensive space. So there's creative things that can be done if it's tied to, interesting imaging technologies or other enabling technologies that are actually saving them money indirectly,
Well, that's a good segue in that I'm seeing so many different technologies in different formats, from multi-purpose, where you can do, say, a laparoscopic approach with any type of surgery, all the way down to, I think, this morning I saw one that was just for colectomy. Last week I spoke with a company that was just for vaginal hysterectomy. How specialized do we need to be? And is there room to have individual, or will it be general multi-purpose robotic system, Tal?
Yeah, I think I'm going back to what Mike mentioned about the procedure. We're all looking at robotic as an add-on to a current procedure. And to change the cost benefit, to change everything, it's a robotic room, it's a robotic procedure. The problem, if you look historically, is the innovation comes from startups. And startup cannot, some of us can get $400 million and start a procedure, but most often you don't get that, and you have to show commercial milestones really fast. And that tied to, I need an add-on, I need to start generating revenues, I cannot go and change. And if you think about even what Stryker did with Mako, they bought it, they shelved it, and they came out with a procedure robotically. And they got all that growth. And I think that will end to more specialized robotics with their tools, whether it's a TAVR, whether it's any device or any procedure, that's a specialized robotic with a skill set for that procedure. Because when you're trying to be general, the question, do you tie that to Anand is doing so many cases a year? Or do you design it that regular guy that's doing 20 procedures a year and doing only the simple? It's a different system, it's a different device, and it's a different cost. So I think we'll go to specialized procedure device bundled with robotics that you control the tip directly to the axis, the point of view that you need, and tie that to a procedure. And low cost. It has to be low cost. We have to move to those disposable robotics, procedural robotics, and not those big $1.5 million per.
Adam, you have half that equation in low cost, because I know your cost competitiveness should be compelling. But tell me about your thoughts. You've got a general purpose where you could do any procedure. You've got to get a beachhead and start somewhere, but you'd like to proliferate everything laparoscopic.
Yeah, I'd say to start with the kind of cost and the VAC conversation, I think more than anything, I agree that like low cost is incredibly important. It's a key part of our pitch. But I think value matters a lot more than cost, right? It's about the ROI to the hospital. If you are delivering better clinical outcomes, making the surgeons' jobs easier, and having a net positive ROI for the hospital, it's a no-brainer. And when you start peeling away one, two, or in some cases all three of those, you start to have a really hard sell. So I think it is a subtlety, but an important distinction between those two. I'll say general versus procedural. I'll kind of just share a bunch of thoughts about this because I don't necessarily have an answer, and I don't necessarily think that there is an answer to this. But I think we've had a window for procedural robots that does absolutely exist today. Now, the question is, in 5 years, will it still exist? Especially when we see, Medtronic and J&J and a number of other companies come out with general robots, especially with, some of the promises of things that can combine endoluminal and laparoscopic. Then is there still a window for a procedure-specific robot once a hospital has multiple? And I think you have to look 5-10 years down the road when designing. I mean, we've been at this for 7 years, and we're launching in a bit over 2. So you really do have to look way down the road, and that's part of why we've decided to go general. But
Yeah, it makes sense. It took us overnight 17 years, so I know the feeling.
Yeah, I think there is space for both, and I think there's definitely, for some of the platforms, there's a market for that, and then the specific smaller mobile in and out of the hospital room specific platforms for specific, there's a need for that also too, especially for smaller hospitals that have less procedures and they need space to be flexible. The larger hospital systems, that can funnel procedures through the central, they're going to need that kind of like central flexibility where they can move in and out very quickly out of the operating room. So I totally agree. Value is going to be the key part of it, and how you sell that value. There's different metrics depending on who the client's going to be.
So let's switch up gears just a little bit, come back to where we started, Mike, about the configuration of the systems and the functionality. Let's talk about autonomy. We look at systems that are out there that are fully autonomous, passive, master-slave relationship, semi-autonomous. Anand, how much autonomy do you want? Do you want this to do most of the procedure? Do you want it to be guiding?
Well, that's a difficult question because I would like to have a job in the future, but at the same time, it'd be nice to, in reality, I think that it'd be nice to have a system that could seriously help you get through these procedures, and especially if a great portion of them are mundane, right, and getting access or just the routine parts of various procedures. And also from a safety and implementation perspective, I think it's going to, anything fully autonomous, I mean, as you can see with self-driving cars and all that, it's quite a long way away probably realistically. And you want to make sure that, because one safety event here and it's going to damage the entire thing. So to me, it makes sense to have a hybrid approach, but one of the biggest keys that's been missing, especially in the kind of the interventional world, is any kind of crosstalk between the imaging or navigation system, if you will, and the catheter or the treatment devices, right, and the wires and all that. And there's no those things are all different. They don't talk to each other. There's no, require sensors to be developed, put in the catheter, and probably just like, some of those current robotic systems where they have their own system in there, it's going to be very difficult to have Siemens, GE, and all that work with all these different catheter companies and stent companies and everything to have these things being fully integrated. So it's going to be a bit of a paradigm shift, but at least, I mean, some sort of semi-autonomous approach to begin with would make most sense.
Just to add to that, I think the one thing that, when we're working on different programs and products in the robotics area, it's clear that we're at a moment where the surgeon or the clinician and the clinicians need to be at the center. So the goals right now are going to be, can I reduce the cognitive load on the surgeons? Can I provide them contextual information when they need it, at the moment that they need it? Those are the things of the next steps. Autonomy, semi-autonomy, maybe portions of the procedure that can be automated eventually in order to relieve the more quote-unquote mundane parts of the surgical procedure, the repetitive ones. That's definitely something that should be coming in the future. But it's kind of like we were talking about automotive industry as an analogy. If GPS just came out, you don't expect a car to drive by itself right away. I mean, it's going to take, decades, and then maybe the car parallel parks, and then maybe you have a guy like Elon Musk and just says, go ahead, just let it drive by itself. But I think we're a ways away from that, and I think the focus needs to be the physician, right, and that physician journey, and the physician and the clinician's interactions around that, and that cognitive load reduction.
I also think, I mean, I totally agree with you guys. I think that there's so many next steps in terms of incremental autonomy that we're going to add that frankly adds a ton of value to the physician during a procedure. Personally, I think one of the most interesting kind of questions is around what full autonomy really is, what full autonomy really looks like in an operating room, right? For a car having a truly autonomous car, the value prop only really stands if you get rid of the human, right? If you can take a nap or have the car come from the parking lot for you. But that's not what we need to achieve in surgery. What we need to achieve in surgery is the surgeon not needing to be in the room for the entire procedure, right? Like we've seen this in anesthesiology already, where in a lot of hospitals, one anesthesiologist will cover 4 operating rooms or maybe even more. I think I've never seen more than 4, but and adding autonomy can really enable that, which is much easier because you still have nurse practitioner or maybe someday a surgical tech running the system and overseeing it, adding their human intelligence, which greatly lowers the bar for what full autonomy needs to be.
And that's what you would take it to remote and duplicate Anand and do a case, and whether it's proctoring today that you see company doing proctoring, the next step is actually dial into that element that only he knows how to do. But I think when you think about the era we are with the amount of data and information the physician has, they usually ignore all these features. You get all these imaging modality, you get all this data. How much do you use? Right? Probably almost nothing, because you cannot digest so much. And I think that's where autonomous will help.
I'd like to think an interventional radiologist does use imaging, but
yeah, but
I'm just kidding. I mean, sort of.
They use the basic imaging. There's so much capabilities if you look in interventional radiologists on the imaging system behind the scenes that if you look on Philips and GE and Siemens, they're trying to train him. In the end of the day, it's those simple, put it in drive and drive it. That's what they're using. So in order to do that, you have to be autonomous because you cannot grasp all of that and you cannot decide about those next steps. And I personally think, again, we speak about the physician. I have to say we have to speak about the patient. What is that specific patient needs and how can the physician help him? Because, again, if we speak about the physician, we're going backwards. We're still trying to make the current procedure better and not think about it from the patient perspective. And what anatomy is that? Because the physician never saw it. And you know what? Take that angle. And here's if you look to your cases, tip that wire in that angle, and go there, and you'll decide how much to advance.
Yeah, I think it's not mutually exclusive. I totally agree with you. The patient journey and how it fits in is absolutely a key part of it. But the surgeon journey also too, and how it works with them and how it helps them succeed. For the next decade, it's going to be that.
Dave just told me to be intentionally on the left side to steer the discussion.
Well done.
Well, I'm personally glad to hear that there's still going to be a clinician involved in the delivery of medicine. I recently had 2 friends that have a history of fibroids and told me, Dave, we're so excited I'm going to get a hysterectomy by a robot. And I had to explain to them, well, I think you're going to get a hysterectomy by a surgeon, but it will probably be robotic assisted So there's still a clinician at the forefront of delivering medicine. It's what they're enabled to do with technology. And we talked about this earlier, that you have many senses that you're going to use, and we're hoping that robotics and the information that we pull around the adjunctive technologies enhance the senses for you to make either better decisions or know what you're doing when you can't use your senses. For instance, you can see behind an organ where you didn't know that that's where the ureter was, or I'm dissecting an organ and I know that there's a 4 millimeter vessel here and that's giving me information, or I knew in my preoperative planning that I couldn't take that planar approach or I was going to hit a critical structure. Anand, tell us about this, because in interventional radiology, you have so much information, but how is it integrated? And not only integrated and afforded to you, but one thing Mike and I were speaking about the other day was the interoperability issue, and that you've got disparate health systems, and that somebody could have had an imaging in one place and come to your facility for the procedure, or you could have different systems that don't talk to each other between the different information systems that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously a huge problem. I compare it to, a lot of the stuff that we have in our health system is, we're using Windows 2000, and all the things we're talking about here are, Windows 2030, and we don't even have the infrastructure, like you said, in having fully integrated medical records and things like that. So I think that, going so many steps forward and having all these devices integrated and is very challenging. And it's going to require work between, the really large companies, the Siemens in the interventional world, the Siemens, the Philips, the people who are making the interventional suites, and then the Boston Scientifics, the Medtronics, the startups, right, to create the treatment tools, the catheters, the devices. And there's ultimately going to require, small chips and sensors that are placed in these devices so they can talk. I think your first question in terms of, or in the analogy you gave of your friend of getting the procedure. I mean, one of the things that's happened a lot in our hospital, most hospitals that have implemented these systems, is there's a fair amount of marketing behind these things. And why hysterectomy is such a common procedure, that why get it at one hospital when you could get another, and the robot may be one ploy, and there may not be definite evidence behind or superiority at this point between one or the other. But that's driven some of this market right now, to say, well, for prostatectomy we have Da Vinci, and for this thing we have the other, and for your knee we have Mako, and so forth. That typically doesn't last forever until you get, you're going to have to get real data, and the value, as you say, Adam, it's going to have to be there. So I think we have a number of issues there, but I do think that when you think of robots, and I mean, it's not really a robot that we're talking about like IBM Watson, that kind of thing. I mean, what these things were trying to do is to give you information, so that, let's say you're doing a really complicated surgery on a uterus or whatever, when you do that in training, the expert surgeon you're with is teaching you, well, you should know that the ureter is going to be there and the bowel is going to be over there, and typically there's a few vessels there, and each different surgery and procedure is very specific to these nuances. That's one of the challenges why things like Watson didn't even work, is because you can't generalize it either, because doing a colon surgery and an interventional, what you really need to know and do to achieve that and not have complications is very different. And so, but that is an opportunity, because the best surgeons know all that stuff and are very efficient at getting through it. And so if you had assistance, I think that would tremendously increase the value.
Tal, a lot of the premise of your technology was the potential down the road of even remote surgery or procedures. When we talk about intelligent surgery or remote access, what is needed to be able to provide that capability? And how far are we from really integrating with some of these adjunct technologies?
Yeah, there is a technology side, which I think it's solvable. It's a matter of time. Meaning, we're all doing Zoom today, and you can start with a dedicated line, then go forward. Meaning, we're landing spaceship and drones on Mars or whatever it is from here. I think the biggest challenge will be legislation, and it will be the regulatory. And can Anand do a case in New York from here? And who owns the patient? Who owns the liability? And who is in the bedside to do remote? I don't think it's a technology barrier. I think that's, I don't want to call it easy, but meaning we at Corindus, we did probably already 3 years ago, 5 cases in India over the web where the physician were 20 miles apart from the patient and placed 5 stents. So that's demonstrated it can be done, and then we do simulation on 5G with Verizon. It's more about who's doing what and where, and what happens if, from a risk perspective, something goes wrong. Do you have the right person at the bedside if there is a perforation? And then what procedure can you do because of that? So I think it will start with those high risk. Stroke is a good example. The reason Corindus went to stroke because it's a high risk but also high reward, because the benefits overcome the risk of something goes wrong, because the time you take that patient to drive 4, 5, 6 hours, you want to intervene. But I think it will take time, meaning it takes time from a perception of the public, it will take time from the legislation. I don't know how FDA even thinks about that. I remember the first FDA meeting we had probably 17 years ago. There was a guy in the corner, and he asked one question: "Are you doing it over Wi-Fi?" We said no, and it was done. So that was their concern back then. It changes, but I think the healthcare today is not set up for that. But with telehealth and all that, it's the next evolution.
I mean, even billing is not set up for that. Yeah. Like there's, yeah, I totally agree.
I think your physician is out of network.
Well, let's go
good
back
one.
to, as you were saying before, let's talk about what's serving the patient and what's enabling the clinician. Anand, you have PAC systems. I have radiologists that are reading something in southern Florida while a picture was taken in Jacksonville. That enables maybe somebody who's an expert or a secondary consult very seamlessly to be anywhere. I know radiologists that aren't even in the facilities. They're with very high fidelity systems that they can look at these images at home. But why not translate into interventional? If you had an expert consult, a secondary person helping along with the procedure, I'm not saying there's nobody in the room where the patient's being treated, but could this be remote secondary interventionalist?
I think it's definitely possible. I mean, I think that's a really good analogy, teleradiology, telemedicine, and the way most places in the United States handle that, of course, is, if you have a need for this, an individual hospital system will say will identify that and will credential these physicians to do that, and that's what we do in our radiology practice. And I think stroke is a great example, because there's a lot of places, let's say 2 hours from here, which may be in the middle of the desert, and see people have strokes everywhere, and it's a long drive out to any facility. But if you could get to a facility even that had bare bones, and you might not have a neurointerventional person out anywhere near there, but this could solve something like that, where our neurointerventionalist here could be in affiliation with that hospital system, control this. There would, of course, need to be technologists, nurses, whoever in the room, and you could do that with a number of different, trauma, there's different clinical pathways where it would make sense. So I think it's definitely, something that's doable. I think international is really hairy. That's difficult, because it adds a much higher level of regulations, and are people licensed in the U.S. and all that. That's really challenging. But yeah.
Sorry. I was real quickly. I think that you guys are going to have really the first true applications of this, because it's kind of the perfect situation of, first of all, buying one robot is way lower cost than staffing 24/7 interventional radiology. Second, minutes literally matter, right? And the risk of putting somebody in an ambulance or on a helicopter and transporting them for an extra 30, 45 minutes is almost certainly outweighs any risk of the remote procedure. And then third, latency is not that big a deal because, again, minutes matter. And, there's likely someone an hour or two away who's 100 miles away and can do the procedure. So anyway.
But I think, Dave, if you're going back to your analogy about radiology, I think the next step is not just a robotic doctor going back to the software. Why to compare to one physician, right? Let's go to 10,000 cases, 20,000 cases, and see what we did and then go back to recommend that physician initially. That's the path. Because right now we're still the way Anand is trained, and then he called his colleague that maybe was trained at MGH and not at Harvard, right? And how do you do that? Or BI. So I think that's the next evolution to enable the right robotics. It's how do you learn from all the cases you did, not just the way you practice, and say that patient has X% to be successful in that approach with that length of a stand and that wire. We don't have that today. We kind of rely on the physician muscle memory that's what I did in that case 5 years ago, and I'm going to do that again and again and again. Most of the time it's right. They're doing a phenomenal job. Don't get me wrong. But because he's doing a lot of cases. And that's, I think, the next enabling. But you need a robotic to do that in the next phase.
So this is a great segue into the last question then. The term here every day is the democratization of robotic-assisted procedures. Anand, do we need to get to democratization? I mean, when I have an orthopedic issue, I've got a left thumb specialist and a right elbow it's so specialized. Should this field be specialized where you're going to have people that are experts in robotic-assisted procedures and other ones really don't require that? Or is that just going to be the standard? Who would ever expect that you're going to have a cholecystectomy not done laparoscopically today? And on that, when you look at even just the training that's required, what is it, 25, 35, 45 cases till you're very proficient in some of them? How far do we go to saying this should be everyone doing the procedures this way?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a tremendous amount of hyper specialization in almost every surgical and whether you call it interventional, surgical, any subspecialty these days, and a lot of that, and then at the same time we have a shortage of medical providers. So I think that there needs to be. I think democratization in that sense is good. I think having an orthopedic surgeon in your example, right, who technically is certified and trained to deal with the thumb, the elbow, all that, but having them not just be comfortable with the thumb, or 5-10 years down their career, being able to make sure that they can keep up with everything they need. That's probably better from a population health standpoint. Certainly, is to maximizing the tremendous skill and value that they inherently have and have obtained during their training. I think, echoing on what Tal says, I think one of the things that I've learned in the last 10 years in practice outside of training is that you actually, the real value in a great medical professional is their anecdotal experience. It's basically all unpublished. There's no data on this thing or that thing. It's like a great doctor, something that they know this piece of information that you might not know, and it's through because they did thousands of cases. Every now and then that comes into the medical literature or it becomes standard of care, but most likely not, because there's too many little instances like that, and all those numerous instances line up, and I think or add up to create real value, and that's why people think they have a great surgeon or whatever perceived benefit there is, and that's how I can tell, when I hire someone new or work with different docs, what are they doing? What are their what are their habits, and what do they learn through other practice, right? That no one else would know. And I think robots can actually ultimately pick that up, or again, that's some of the really deep knowledge that they could provide. And so I think that would be, rather than just saying, okay, well, a robot can advance a catheter into the aorta and into a vessel somewhere. Everyone can already do that, but what's the difference between me doing it versus, expert person at Miami Vascular, whatever, that he would do, that he would know some little tip or some trick. Those are the things that actually will help democratize further, right? Because a lot of those physicians may only do one kind of surgery or interventional procedure, but now if I know their little tips and tricks, I feel more comfortable doing it and can get through it.
Yeah, I agree with that one. I think robotic systems allow you to collect data and information, and I think which will allow better trainers to be created. And the reason why physicians need to have 25, 35, 45 procedures to be done, because they need to be exposed to different types of scenarios. But if you can train people with the various scenarios, it becomes like, I think we were mentioning, Tal was mentioning airplane pilots. So if Sully was able to land in the Hudson because he trained for it, it's not something that most pilots would ever experience, no matter how many times they flew in the air. But if you can create that training program, then you can truly democratize the ability to have many more surgeons readily available, especially in more remote areas or rural areas or less served areas, more capable in order to execute the things that population needs.
Thanks, Mike. I want to note to anybody in the audience, of course, the panel is available for any questions. I know everybody's probably had a few too many wines, and if you're adjacent to the bar, you're not allowed to ask questions. But please just raise your hand. We'll get a microphone or step forward and shout however you want to ask questions, because we've got a lot of wealth of knowledge here. Until we get one, the last issue is Adam. We look at a lot of different business models, just in not only in robotics, but across all different technologies. I must have heard in 15 meetings today 14 different business models. But surely in robotic systems, they could be all capital, they could be proprietary, or you could have end effectors that are open source. I see Medtronic with Mazor, they place this without capital requirement, but they will get a lockup on the hardware that's implanted. Tell me about the different business models, and I'm sure you've had many different considerations that you have to go through.
Yeah, I'll say, we've obviously. Oh, okay. Sorry, confused me a little there, Scott. I'd say we've had a lot of different potential opportunities, done a lot of research here. First of all, hospitals are sophisticated. They, at the end of the day, the real number that matters is again, it's total value, which includes the cost of each individual patient that you care for using the technology. So, whether you're amortizing, the CapEx and it's purchased outright, or whether you use financial instruments to help offset that cost, or per procedure, or literally give away truly give away the capital for free. I think there's a lot of interesting models, but at the end of the day, it's that total per procedure cost, and then the value that you create for the facility. I will say there's a few places where that does break down. In the U.S., there are some intricacies here. The fact that the capital equipment market really remains pretty strong for a number of reasons, including a combination of tax reasons, as well as donors who will put their name on capital equipment, but no one really wants to buy like a million scalpels and have their name on that. So there are some intricacies of this, but there's no straightforward answer, and I think flexibility in understanding your customers' needs and being able to have an offering that works for them rather than shoving something down their throat is incredibly important.
Yeah, I completely agree. Meaning we sold a lot through donors, and we actually were doing donors events. But I like your flexibility, and in the end of the day, you don't have a lot of options, because when you launch robotics, usually you have one device or one thing you sell. So the only remedy is usually price, and you have to place in the right places that actually will drive the usage early on, and then you can start being more arrogant. The way Intuitive Surgical right now is, this is the price, I don't care. But early days, you have to find that method to get the physician to use that and show the value. It's a chicken and the egg, but that's the way it works.
Mike, you do a tremendous amount of consulting on the business and then, of course, the design of the systems. Are you looking to design these as open platform or with proprietary components that would not allow others to be incorporated?
So right now, I think the open platform is the ideal situation that we probably should be going forward in order to allow more innovation to flourish. But that's not where it's at right now. I think there's just not enough incentive to do it that way yet. So no.
Okay, I saw Scott doing the Mom I've Got to Pee dance in the back, jumping up and down. So did you have a question?
My Apple phone told me to stand up, so I just wanted to stand up and say hello to Adam. But we do have a question here.
I am the Chief Financial Officer of what we could call a handheld robotics company. The topic of this panel discussion has been terrific. My simple question for David is, or any of you, is there a conference such as this one that Scott has put on that is devoted to this topic that you all have been talking about?
We've all promised Scott we won't advertise for other conferences here.
Oh. And two. I'm returning in any case here, but this particular topic is just really relevant to what we're doing.
I've seen a lot of publications. We've seen conferences on digital health incorporating robotics. I can't say I've seen a pure robotics in medicine conference yet, but Scott's a businessman and an opportunist. I've been asking him about this for a little while.
I mean, not in this kind of format where it's about the devices, right? There's SRS and some of the other things around that, but that's more clinicians and clinical applications than anything else.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I'll keep an eye out for it.
Hi, Alan May. Great panel. Thank you guys. So I'm a big devotee, as most folks know, of business model, and Dave, you brought up business model and this panoply of business models. So the technology innovation is really cool, but where's the innovation in business models? So what are your predictions? What do you guys think? You know, so the CapEx model was a big inhibitor to adoption. A lot of these other business models are trying it. What's going to work? What changes do you see coming up that are going to drive these kinds of technologies forward, not necessarily because of the technology, but because of the business model?
I can start. I don't think there's a right answer for that. Obviously, you can do value share and look at outcomes and 30 days follow-up and so forth. I can tell you in Corindus, we launched a program way back, one stent guarantee. So if you place more than one stent robotically, we'll reimburse the second stent. For the CFO of the hospital, it did not matter because this is a capital. It's come from a different budget, it's disposable. We got like a handful of claims. So I think it will take time to do the value, but then when you own the procedure, I think in the end of the day, you pay for a procedure, robotics is part of that. Right now, again, we're doing procedure and add-on robotics into that. But once you start getting outcomes, and hopefully we'll get clinical outcomes and patient follow-up, it should pay for itself. But this is not a good answer. I wish we can go there and do the value share, which companies hate, hospitals likes most of the time. But it's also tied to the way the hospital is paying. Maybe Anand knows more than me, but they're getting a DRG code. We're tapping into that right now. So once they start doing, for example, interventional procedures based on the 30 days follow-up or 60 days follow-up, then you can tie the robotic procedure outcomes to that and show that's more precise, or the physician had enough rest, and that outcomes drive patient outcomes, and therefore you can pay for that with enhanced reimbursement.
So to build on what Tal said, I mean, I think it's actually beyond the robot. You're not going to be able to drive a strong business case just on the robotic system for quite some time. I think that's where a lot of companies now are talking about the digital surgery, which encompasses the perioperative events. So, you know, operative tracking of information, and all the way through post-operative to follow-ups that are occurring, because really you need to track what the full outcome is. You can't tell that from just the information coming from the robot. You'll never be able to do it. But you need to keep tracking the whole patient journey from beginning to end, from diagnosis to hopefully cure. And if you can measure that, then it'll be an overall shared risk profile between payer, hospital, and device supplier.
Alan, I got to look at this as these are businesses. You asked about the business model. These are for-profit companies that are going to optimize their margin. So I think the business model is dictated by what their margin requirements and their capabilities to charge for a premium price. The premium price has to be commensurate with the value that they deliver, and that will be determined by the market. The novelty in the business models are really dependent on the individual. Again, Intuitive goes out there to market with $1 million plus capital. They don't have all of the end effectors, so they're not picking up all of the revenue on the secondary components. When you look at, again, the Missouri model, well, they can get the robots in there very cost efficiently by not charging, but pick up all that hardware. Now, if any other company didn't have all the hardware, but they wanted to sell robots, it would be a different business model. So I think it's really the business opportunity and what the market, like any other free economy, what the market will bear.
I also...
But is it, sorry, Adam, but just to throw on that, but are you selling gadgets? Are you in the hardware business? Are you selling outcomes? Are you selling time? Is it the time they use your system? Are you coming up with new ways for your customer to pay for what it is you're giving them?
I actually kind of ties into what I was going to say pretty well. I think the really important question is, what do customers want to buy? And, why are we looking at or considering innovating on new business models? This is not to take an overly pessimistic view here. I actually do believe there's a lot of opportunity for new business models here, but I also think it's a really important point to look at the fact that there are things that hospitals today are comfortable with, that they want, that they already have the purchasing system set up for. And, innovation for innovation's sake is, ironically, in some ways, something we kind of try to discourage at our company, right? There's a lot of creative, innovative people. Sometimes you need to focus on what your core value prop is, execute on that, and deliver on it. And if innovation in a business model is not necessary, at least in the beginning, then maybe don't go there. But I think that all that being said, I think long term, everything everybody's talked about and that you mentioned are all going to be really interesting options.
I think there's also, just to add to that, I mean, from what I've seen with hospitals purchasing major capital equipment, whether it being in the OR or imaging or intervention or whatever, it's not a fully satisfying answer, but it's the truth, is that there's a life cycle to those suites. So like our Philips room in one of our cath lab rooms is 12 years old or whatever, it's done. So now when we go out, and I'm part of that committee to source the new room, it's just like why does BMW, Mercedes, they have some driver assist. They were never into that because they know the people buying those kind of cars now are also looking at Tesla and everything. So they have to keep up. And I mean, that's not the fastest way to innovate, but basically every 10, 15 years, whenever a new MRI or whatever needs to be bought, those things need to have the current bells and whistles of that time. And that may be, how, like on the interventional side, okay, that we'll buy Philips because they have this robotic system, and maybe we're not using it today, but maybe in 2 years we'll need it, and they're going to give us a good package, and we'll get that over another company. And so that's one way I've seen it actually happen in current practice.
Scott, was there anything else we had out in the audience? Well, I think that's a wrap then. I want to thank all of the panelists. We had such a diverse background. Really appreciate the comments and all your time on this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.